Welcome back. We're back at the podcast business. My name's Matthew Leffler, the armchair attorney. I'm excited to have you here once again on this semi-regular, generally speaking, conversation with really interesting people in supply chain and law, and just people I find generally interesting. And I have two really interesting people today who can shed some light on some really interesting stories we have been seeing in the news on supply chain. Obviously, we have people like Yellow out there doing things. We have Surge. There's a new story about a Chinese intermodal manufacturer of chassis and containers. We'll get to all of those things. But before that, let me just give a couple little shout outs. As always, today's broadcast is brought to you by me, my head floating. Right, there he is. There he is. But also, Contract Leasing Corporation. Contract Leasing Corporation, for over 30 years, since 1991, CLC has provided wonderful, well-maintained truck chassis, trailers, and anything you need for trailing assets, whether it's refrigerated, dry vans, flatbeds, or chassis. You need trailers. I know this. Maybe you want to maintain them. Maybe you don't. If you don't want to maintain them, we can do that for you. So if you want to learn more about CLC and all of the great deals we have going on today, all you got to do is follow this link, contractleasing.net, You'll be able to find trailers. I know you need them. We care about the truck. The truck is a great proxy for the freight, but reality is everything comes in that box. And I do love those boxes. If you are in Chattanooga, this message is for you. On Tuesday, August 15th, I will be at the Tennessee Trucking Association speaking about maintenance and repair. If you have seen it, the Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance has released its data around last International Road Check. And as you might guess, it's not so pretty. 1 in 5 commercial vehicles that are inspected during this International Road Check, the 72-hour blitz, failed. Did not meet the minimum thresholds required to meet the FMCSA guidelines for safe operating equipment. Those assets were paused, out of service, until they get fixed. Now, you might be saying, Matt, 1 in 5 sounds like a lot, but an 80% is still an 80%. That's a B. That's still passing. Probably not the way to look at it. These are commercial vehicles that are on our highways, and it has been clear for many, many years that about 1 in 5 will fail inspection. And this is when motor carriers know the inspections are coming. So, reasoning be what it is, maybe there is a little bit more that's going on with maintenance. So I'll be talking about maintenance again in the Tennessee Trucking Association on August 15th, 2023, 11:30 Eastern Standard Time. If you want to see me live and in person and realize that I'm not actually just 3 cats in a human being costume, you'll be able to find out for sure that that is who I am. Now, let's get to the guest today. Let's first turn off the music. I like the music, but it's not really conducive to having a conversation. Today, I'm joined by some incredible people who you know, probably, because they are experts in this industry. I'm joined by Ari Ashe and Eric Johnson from the Journal of Commerce. Gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Eric, I'm going to start. You are in India right now, and we talked about this before the show. What time is it where you are?
India is 10 and a half hours ahead of Central U.S. time, so it's 11:30 at night. But, you know, it's Friday, so why would I be sleeping right now anyway? So.
Well, I appreciate you joining me. This is now a global program. This is wonderful. This is my first international person on the call. I'm glad you're able to make it. Ari, how are you doing, sir?
I'm good. I'm in Maryland, so, United States, Eastern time, so it's afternoon for me too.
Well, I appreciate us both being here. I am an avid fan of the Journal of Commerce, but for those who don't know what the Journal of Commerce is, Ari, can you kind of give a little bit of overview of what the Journal of Commerce is and what you do with JOC?
Sure. So the Journal of Commerce is a publication that focuses on the containerized shipping industry. And historically, it's been revolved around ports and ocean container shipping around the ports and the NVOCCs and the importers and the exporters, and then the inland flow of those containers to warehouses and the distribution of those the freight inside those ocean containers across the supply chain. JOC has long been known as the voice of the BCO. One thing I know we've worked on quite hard over the last 5 years that I've been there is to really expand our domestic coverage. as you obviously know with some of the stories that I post, to really be the voice of the shipper in the domestic space, because once it leaves that ocean container, it still moves throughout the United States in the supply chain. And there are shippers out there that have concerns in the 53-foot world. And so I think we've done a very good job over the last several years also covering the 53-foot world from the perspective of the issues and things that matter to the shippers.
Well, nothing's made here these days. Everything's made somewhere else and has to get here. So the supply web is an international thing. And speaking of international things, Eric, tell me, what's your role with the Journal of Commerce? What do you do day to day?
So I am Ari's colleague. I'm generally, when I'm not in India, I'm based in the DC area like him. I am senior technology editor. So that means that I'm writing about basically any technology or category of software that is impacting, again, primarily through the lens of the shipper, but also I have a bit wider brief. I'm looking at things that matter to LSPs and carriers as well across modes. So I've kind of
what's an LSP, Eric? What is that
or
term?
logistics service provider. So
okay.
Another moniker for a 3PL. In the domestic space, obviously, we're talking about freight brokers. On the international side, freight forwarders, NVOs, 4PL, all your different flavors of logistics companies.
Well, I had the chance last year to attend the Inland Distribution Conference. I'm going to throw us up here. For those of you who are watching this, you're going to see this thing. It says the JOC's Inland Distribution Conference is September 25th through the 27th. That's this year in Chicago. There's a link here as well. I'll have this all in the show notes. If you're listening to this as a podcast later on, you're not going to see this thing that I'm showing you, but it will be in the show notes. So what is the Inland Distribution Conference? What is that all about?
Let me take this one. So it is our domestic side complement to our other conference, which a lot of people probably known as TPM. TPM focuses, Trans-Pacific Maritime was a historic name that focuses again on the ports and the ocean transportation. Inland takes it from the ports inland. So we cover international intermodal, we cover domestic intermodal, we cover truckload, we cover LTL, we cover expedited and parcel. Again, all from the perspective of what are the things that matter to the shippers and receivers in the domestic space, and what are the key issues, and then getting answers to some of those key issues.
That's fascinating. So I will absolutely be in attendance. I'm excited for a chance to kind of learn what's been going on. But I'm curious, Eric, we talked about LTL a little bit. Have you heard about this company, Yellow Corporation? I think I've also seen it called YRC Worldwide. I've heard Yellow Roadway. What is this company? What's happening? Have you heard anything about this?
No, this is the first time hearing anything. A joke, obviously. So yeah, obviously one of the biggest names, not just in the LTL space, but in the entire truckload space. Yellow has been having a difficult time of it the last few months. Well, the last couple decades, if we're being honest. But it's come to a head in the last couple months with them declaring bankruptcy. I'm losing track of my days. I've been traveling a bit here and on different time zone, but I think it was end of last week that they formally declared bankruptcy, most likely putting 30,000 people, not all of them union, but a big chunk of them union.
Yeah, I think 22,000 union drivers, what I've seen reported.
Out of work, unless there is some white knight who comes in and saves the company rather than breaks it down for parts, essentially, which appears to be more.
And I don't foresee that happening. I mean, the Matthew, you may even have thoughts on this. The equipment was old, because they were such a low cost carrier. So I don't really know what interest there would be in their equipment anyway.
Well, there's some collectible roadway trailers still out there that are probably over 20 years old.
Yes, so from a historical perspective, yes.
Yeah, maybe
the tractors and the trailers they're running today are not probably in high demand because these weren't new units that have a lot of street value.
Well, I mean, we as the U.S. Treasury Department, I think it was last year, the year before, gave Yellow essentially a loan for $700 million. And in exchange, the Treasury has like 30.6 or some 30% or so of the equity. Is that going to be good for us? Are we going to see a good ROI on this, or are we going to be washed out? Any idea on that?
No, I think so. I think that they're. I'd have to look this up, but I would assume they're probably a secured creditor of some type, so that they would get priority in the liquidation process with the court system. So I think the government will get its money back. The concern I would have government-wise is the reason why they got that loan was because they had a lot of the DoD contracts. So then the question becomes, what is going right now on with the contractors who execute some of those contracts on behalf of the DoD? If yellow is now not an option for them, who are they using and what is the cost that they're paying? Because that ultimately would also come to the taxpayer.
That's right. That's right. Well, Eric, one thing I remember when I was watching the story of Yellow unfolding was there was this payment to the Central States Fund, and they had to pay Central States about $50 million. And it's supposed to be done July 15th. And they didn't do it. And the Teamsters said, we are going to strike. We're going to strike because you've cut our benefits. They're going to have, I think, like 11,000 families. We're going to lose their insurance. And Yellow was in court trying to prevent the Teamsters from striking. They were in court making a motion to get a temporary restraining order. And then they lost that. And over the weekend, a deal was struck between Teamsters and Central Funds to, basically extend the payment terms. When you were watching this, did you feel like there was still a path for Yellow, or were you thinking, okay, this is where it's going to go? There's nothing else from this.
So let me caveat this by saying I am not an expert in pension funds and legal proceedings around this. You are very much more of an expert than I am. So whatever opinion I have, I would not call an expertly informed opinion about like whether this was the death knell or the final nail in the coffin or whether it offered a ray of hope. What I will say, and I think most watchers who've been in this industry for a long time and have seen the different cycles that Yellow went through where they appeared extremely close to death or not in good health and sort of found a way to recover. I don't think it was unreasonable to say up until literally the last moment, this will be their eighth life, or this will be their seventh life. They will find a way to sort of make it through. But it really appeared, again, from the outside looking in, that the Teamsters were going to take a hard line, and they were not going to sort of, subsidize the continued existence of Yellow this time, even if it hurt them or hurt their members who are directly affected. I mean, I have read some stuff that suggests that from a strategic perspective, they sort of sacrificed Yellow at the altar of UPS and other, kind of bigger battles to win the war kind of thing, right? So, yeah, I mean, I definitely thought to myself, they're not done until they're done.
Yeah.
Right. And even now, like, we're still sort of like floating this idea out there that there's like a time, you need the Jim Carrey, from Dumb and Dumber.
So there's still a chance. There's still a chance.
Now, right? Yeah, exactly.
No, I didn't. I thought their, goose was cooked pretty much after the Teamsters. And the reason I would say that is because I spoke to a lot of their top shippers. Obviously, I wouldn't want to name names, but rest assured, I spoke to a number of companies that everyone watching this has heard of, actually bought products from them. And the conversation gravitated from, in the beginning, about 3 or 4 weeks before the Teamsters action, being, we're a little leery to move freight away from Yellow. We don't want to be the company that causes them to fold.
Yeah.
We don't want to be responsible for that. And so we're going to stick with them. We may consider winding down our volume or weaning them away, but we're not going to pull it all the way because we don't want to be the company that kills them. These are from, again, big brand name companies that we would all know. Once the Teamsters thing happened and they were able to connect the dots that Yellow had $100 million cash on hand, and the payment to Central States, the two payments to Central States for July and August, with interest, would have taken them down to about $30 to $35 million cash on hand. That potential strike, gave the shippers an excuse to say, I've got to pull my freight.
Yeah, turn it off. Just turn it off.
Turn it off, because I can't have it stranded during a strike. But that conversation also changed, because after the strike didn't happen, I went to these shippers and said, are you going to bring stuff back to Yellow, or are you really concerned about this cash flow statement, these cash flow concerns? And so every one of those shippers over that 3 to 4 week span changed their opinion to, no, we're not going to give it back to Yellow, because the numbers that we see make us question whether or not they're going to be around. And I think I wrote this on our on LinkedIn. that if you yank freight from Yellow and then bring it hypothetically to XPO, because you think there's a strike that's going to happen, and then a week or two later you take it back from XPO and put it on Yellow, only for Yellow to go out of business 30 days later.
That's
Well,
right.
if you have to go back to XPO a second time, XPO is not going to take your business, and even if they do, they're going to jack up your rates through the roof, and you get a bad reputation as a shipper when you do that. When you yo-yo that type of freight, you come off in a very transactional way, a very penny pinching way, and LTL providers don't like that. So once the Teamsters thing happened, that was pretty much the death knell right there.
Do you think the shippers remembered? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Eric.
Sorry, you're supposed to be the one asking.
No, I love it. This is a conversation.
Ari and I are used to asking questions. I think you can broaden this out. The point Ari made is super important, and I think you can broaden it out beyond just the Yellow and LTL, right? Like, if anything, this was a perfect example of the pressure that shippers are under a lot these days to have relationships with the right service providers, whether it's a carrier or non-asset based, sort of service provider. It's not just about, do they give me good service? Is the price right? Do they treat me well, through the cycles? Do they give me good data? You also have to have this metric where you're measuring, like, are they a provider that's stable enough for me to count on to sort of create a relationship that's going to be longer than just the transaction of a single shipment. It seems very simple to go, oh, Yellow's in trouble. Like, why would anyone move with them? But Ari makes it, a perfect point that shippers have to balance that. Other carriers are watching them. Other service providers are watching their behavior too. And if they're yo-yoing it, it's not just they lose favor with those two, that they're yo-yoing back, but word gets around, and sales reps are going to go like, no, I don't think we want to pursue them, because they'll yank their business at the first sign of trouble, or the first sign that we want to raise rates by 2%. So they're a cipher really for this bigger issue.
There was a place for Yellow in the sense that, and I give credit, Robert Morris of W.W. Kellogg, the cereal company. He's going to be doing an entire session on the first day of our conference in Chicago on September 25th on this. And one of the things he always tells me is that when you're building out a domestic network, truckload, intermodal, LTL, you're not just a strategic customer or a transactional customer. You don't just use one mode and not use the other mode. You're a little bit of everything. And so what you have to do as a shipper is do customer segmentation, which happens in all industries across the world. Customer segmentation, and you group your receivers who are big accounts, and then you group the receivers that are very small accounts. You group them by service sensitivity. So if you go to a place like Walmart with the OTIF regulations, then you have to have a certain type of service related to that. If you're going to a smaller provider where service is not as critical, then you use another provider. And so Yellow had that place where you build out that transportation network, and you have to hit a budget number as the VP of supply chain or the VP of transportation, and you need to cut costs and meet that number. For some of those low-end customer segmentation folks who are small receivers, who are not service sensitive, that's where you plug Yellow in, or where you plug intermodal in. So they always had that place for some of these shippers who had, thousands and thousands of receivers that they were sending things to.
Do you think the shippers remembered CF? Like, when CF went out, it was one of the biggest bankruptcies in U.S. trucking history, over 15,000 employees, over $1 billion of revenue. And people lost a ton of freight. Like, it was stuck on docks for months. Do you think people remember that? Or is the institutional memory of this so far away, people don't even think about it?
No, I would say to you, there was one shipper I spoke to who's in the medical supply industry. And he said to me, we pulled our freight about a month before the Teamster stuff happened. And his explanation to me was, we experienced a lot of problems as a company when CF happened. We don't want a repeat of that. We don't want our cargo stranded. We're rushing, as he said, to pay all the receivables that we have with them to make sure that there's no money still left or open invoices. And then our perspective, he said back then, was if they survive, then they're probably going to be very hungry for freight to get back on their feet, and we'll be able to renegotiate some of the terms we didn't like in our previous deal. And if they don't survive, we kind of beat everyone to the punch going to other LTLs, and will not get the type of rate increases that are now happening with some of the shippers who waited too long.
Is there a path for them to live, Eric? You think there's a path for this, or is it too early to tell? Or is it, I always shake his head. Do you think there's a path?
If I had to put money on it, if you made me put money on it, I'd say no. Man, I mean, it seems too far gone at this point.
Who would want to dump money in a company whose OR was regularly between 98 and 103?
I mean,
that's a very good question.
There's the real estate. It's not like probably as juicy as I think was initially sort of speculated with the terminals, but it's not. I mean, it's not nothing. So, but again, it's broken down for parts. It's not really at that point. You're not really trying to keep it together.
Go ahead.
It's really like, in my mind, like Sears, where when Sears went under, really the value that they had were the properties that they owned and were able to sell. Now, Yellow, as you pointed out, leased a fair number of their properties, so they don't own all of the facilities. But to the extent real estate is probably the main asset of any value that they have left through liquidation.
But all the Sears, those locations that were supposed to be like fulfillment centers, they all ended up being in dumpy malls that are being torn down anyway. So
that reminds me of KB Toys.
Real estate. It's not even like primary. So
well, I look at this is a company that is a survivor, right? Like 1924 is when they were founded, right? Long time ago, 99 years ago. Roadway 1930, so still long time ago. FedEx Ground used to be It was Roadway Package System. Conway, which we got by XPO, that was former CF. So like these are companies that are smart. I gotta think, is there a tech play where you could have the real estate remains as an LTL dock, but other people can use them? Is there a path? Do you think? I'm trying to think of a way. How can you make this useful? There's got to be a path.
No, I think the way it plays out, Matthew, is that LTLs that are looking to trade up, and we were talking about this before we went live. LTLs that are looking to trade up, get bigger docks because they're expanding, they're getting more business, will buy some of those properties so that they can increase their square footage. And then the secondary effect becomes their locations that are smaller square footage will end up going on the market, and some of the smaller guys will take advantage. And this is something that Knight Swift talked about on their earnings call, where they said they may not directly, because they own AAA Cooper and they own Midwest Express, they may not necessarily directly buy any Yellow properties that are on sale, but they may get into the game if another LTL buys a Yellow property because, again, they want to increase their acreage in their terminals, and then all of a sudden has another terminal that they can offload at that point that's smaller, that fits better into the AAA Cooper Midwest Motor Express. So I think that's kind of how it all shakes out.
Okay. Well, let's shift gears. We've talked about Yellow for a little bit. I'm curious. You broke a story earlier this week, Ari, around CIE manufacturing. For those who have no idea about intermodal and marine chassis, what is CIE manufacturing and what is happening?
Okay. So CIE, which was formerly known as CIMC Intermodal, which is a subdivision of CIMC, so the CIMC company itself produces marine containers, 53-foot containers, and then the unit I'm talking about, which was CIMC Intermodal, now CIE Manufacturing, produces chassis. Mm-hmm. So they produce 20 foots, 40 foots, 45 foot, 53s. They
convertibles that can do 20 or 40s.
They can, they produce every type of chassis. And the reason why this is so important is because they are a major supplier to a lot of companies across the United States.
They're the biggest, right? They're the biggest out there.
Yes. Even after the tariffs that were put in place in, 2020, 2021, the anti-dumping countervailing duties, it helped some American businesses gain some market share, but it certainly did not put a dent in the fact that CIE is still single-handedly the biggest supplier of new chassis to North America. And so this has a wide stream effect. So what happened here is, to take it back in history, CIE filed a case last year against one of the American companies known as Pitts Enterprises.
Yeah.
And
that's a Dorsey company, right?
Dorsey is the subsidiary of Pitts. They said Dorsey is making chassis in Vietnam, but what they're doing is they're trucking stuff over from China across the border into Vietnam, assembling it in Vietnam, bringing it in the United States and saying it's made in Vietnam, and evading duties, countervailing anti-dumping duties that way. Pitt said, or Dorsey said, no, we were doing pretty much all the work in Vietnam. Yes, we got some stuff trucked over the border, but the work was really happening in Vietnam. And the CPB ruled for CIE and against Pitts and said, you evaded duties. You owe us X tens of millions of dollars, because, and any chassis you bring in the future has to have these countervailing and anti-dumping duties. So fast forward now, months later after this was settled, although it's been appealed, so it's still technically in the appeals process. But after this happened, we fast forward several months later, and now a coalition called the Coalition of American Chassis American Chassis Manufacturers, which Pitts is a member of, filed a case against CIE that said, well, they're doing the same thing. They're doing the same thing with the facility that they opened after the anti-dumping and countervailing duties were announced. CIE opened up a facility in Thailand. So the claim here, and they said, we'll just build out of Thailand now. So claim here is now they're either moving stuff from China to Thailand, building it in Thailand, bringing it to the United States, or they're building it in Thailand, they're stopping in China, some stuff from their Dongguan facility is making it in and then going to the United States. And either way, China's still part of their production of chassis, and therefore they should be, like Pitts, paying countervailing and anti-dumping duties. CIE is adamant that that is absolutely not true. So what I could say is I don't know where this case will end up, but I can tell you that I spoke to the CIE CEO and I asked him 5, 6, 7 different ways the direct question of any Chinese components, anything in their chassis. And he was very, very clear with me. Absolutely not. No way, no how. So only thing I can say is if the case goes against him, then my question would be, did he lie to me? And I didn't get a sense that he was lying to me. Now, not again prejudging the outcome, but he seemed very, very convinced that he has every fact on his side when they go through the case, that they are not touching China.
Eric, do we have enough chassis right now, like that are in the market? So if we have some postponed, is there enough available at the moment?
Yeah, we're in by the way, you're asking the wrong guy of the two of us. No, we stay with the chassis questions with Ari, but reading Ari's stuff and hearing him at Inland last year, I know that we are in a much better and probably a absolutely fine place with chassis supply right now in North America. 2 years ago, that answer was completely different. Now we probably have surplus. Am I correct?
Yeah, I know. So the CIE CEO, Trevor Ashe, no relation to me, I asked him, like, would you acknowledge that, had this happened 18 months ago, the ramification would have been far worse? And he agreed.
Yeah.
There's certainly not that demand. And just to kind of close the loop on this, so it's not just the 20s and 40s. They are pretty much the only supplier I've ever seen build chassis for JB Hunt.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
So
and containers.
Yeah, well, the containers are not part of this case, though. So
yeah, okay.
Those wouldn't be affected. But to the extent JB Hunt needed to order chassis for whatever reason, they've pretty much used CIE/CIMC throughout their history. So I'm not sure what they would do.
Interesting. All right, let me ask you this, Eric. So we saw, we've talked about CIE. There was a case that happened recently with Surge Transportation. This was a freight brokerage company that went belly up. Have you been following this story? Have you seen anything about this? What's going on? These technology companies that are also freight brokers.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? This has been a big part of my world the last, let's see, well, 8, 9 years, 10 years since Convoy and Flexport first came on the scene, and we became acquainted with the term digital broker, digital forwarder. So Surge quietly, I guess, amidst the whole yellow stuff, declared bankruptcy. They were a freight broker that sort of grew quickly, but also struggled mightily over the last year as freight demand kind of fell back to pre-pandemic normal kind of levels. For me, I have sort of abandoned, unless there's a specific reason, I've really stopped calling digital brokers, and I just call them brokers now.
That's right.
Because I think people had become cynical about reading that. They would automatically I think, shut off their brain whenever they saw the term digital broker. So I honestly think the companies that sort of see themselves as digital brokers get more of a fair shake when you just call them a broker and then explain what it is they're doing.
You don't get a tech multiplier when you call yourself a broker, Eric. That's the challenge. Like, you need to get that 10x revenue. That's what it's all about, I think.
Well, see, here's the thing. And I've had to learn finance through the prism of digital, freight models, essentially. And once upon a time, you could get a multiple for digital intermediary business that looked a lot like a software or SaaS multiple. Yeah. Somewhere along the line, most of the people who had cash to spend in our industry realized those were two different models. There's still, the odd VC that will sort of overvalue a digital intermediary from a growth perspective and what that valuation is. But the reality is the only one that mattered when it came to what that valuation is whoever acquired them or whether they went to an IPO in the public market. And if neither of those valued it like the VCs were valuing it 8, 9, 10 years ago, then it doesn't really matter whatever they're called or however they see themselves. But you're right. I mean, in some cases, it was a pretty clear attempt to sort of like position themselves as something, more valuable than a traditional broker, even if it was less valuable on a multiple basis than a pure software provider. Mm-hmm. But it was a great way until investors learned what the difference between pass-through revenue and like actual margin was. It was a great way to show a huge amount of revenue for a really young company. Yeah. Right. So, and that's on both sides. That's not just on the brokerage side.
The days of $7 per mile is just it's not back right now. And it probably won't come back for a good long period of time. You mentioned Convoy. Now, there was a story that you've been covering for a long time, Convoy DAT litigation. From everything I've read now, they're best friends, or at least they're frenemies. They've settled their thing. But for the folks who are watching, like, what was that case about? Because you've followed that pretty closely.
So yes, they're friends in the way that friends are after they take each other to court and then settle out of court. Right?
That's right.
So let's see. I have to get my years right here. I think this was at the beginning of 22. DAT, which is of course probably most famously known as the biggest load board in North America. They
dial a truck. Absolutely.
Dial a truck. Yeah, literally dial a truck from a rest stop in Oregon, I believe. Right, that was the origins. They also provide pricing and analytics tools. And hey, buddy.
This makes me so happy. Hey, bud, how you doing? I have a puppy in the background. She's coming my way now.
Yeah, my son is hopefully fast asleep right now, so we won't get any intruders. So they filed a lawsuit against Convoy, who is a broker.
They made Convoy for brokers. Convoy puts out this thing, Convoy for brokers. DAT spins around and goes, "You're competing with me. We made a deal. You can't do that."
And Convoy was a customer of DAT.
That's right. That's right.
So the allegation was that Convoy had somehow used the understanding of how DAT's load board worked to build their own internal load board. And to be clear, a lot of brokers operate their own private load boards, right? That are theoretically competitive with DAT. Convoy countersues about 5 months later, saying that DAT is sort of engaging in monopolistic behavior. They force brokers to sort of use their business because their tools are so important, and they structure the contract in such a way that it sort of hurts competition in that business. There was a few motions which you graciously helped me understand from a legal perspective.
Oh, it's fantastic stuff.
Yeah, it's like right in your wheelhouse, literally. And
non-competition between businesses. That's a really fun topic. It's really interesting to see what they do.
Non-competition, law, and transportation, right?
That's right. That's the holy grail right there.
It's almost like they did it for you.
And what makes me so happy is that they did ultimately resolve it. Like we talked about this. Like the idea was DAT was giving Convoy a discount for only using DAT. Convoy's like, we're going to go a different rec. We'll pay extra $5,000 per month. We're fine with this. And we saw the litigation of the anti-competition stuff. A lot of people were excited about that. And then of course they settle. I mean, no one wants to go to court and do that.
And credit where credit is due. You went on our friend Chris Jolly's show, the day after the countersuit from Convoy, after I wrote about it. And then he had you on the show to explain this. And you literally said, I have the quote because I tweeted about it 13 months ago. I was like, Chris is like, what's the most likely thing that happens? He said, oh, they're going to settle out of court. No one wants to go through discovery and actually appear in court. Lo and behold, that's exactly what happened.
The nice thing is it's 90 to 95% of all litigation settles out of court. So you're almost always going to be right.
Daniel Caffey, I'm famous for quoting movies, right? Daniel Caffey, he never wanted to go to court. He always settled out of court. He always pled before it ever got in front of a judge. Little did he know he was literally the best trial attorney of all time. So
well, even really seasoned litigators, at best they're litigating 1 or 2 cases a year. You don't go to trial. That's one of that's where good ideas go to die is a trial. So you threaten people, you get them to be a little bit excited, and then they eventually capitulate.
You're literally putting your hands in the lives of other people.
The only problem I had with Daniel Caffey is he stepped into the well when he was doing the questioning, and obviously in a real court, the lawyer just kind of walked into the well towards the attorney. I think the bailiff would probably.
You can't. There's a lot of things you can't do, and you can't touch when the jurors are. You can't touch the thing. There's a bunch of rules, and judges are very particular about these things. Okay, so we've had let's say we've had a freight recession. That's what I've heard. When did it start? And for everyone watching, when does it end? What's the answer to that question?
Well, I can say from the domestic side that on the truckload space, I'd say it started probably 18 months ago. Somewhere, 18 months ago, I'd say. Somewhere in Q1 of last year. And then for intermodal, it was pretty much at the halfway point of last year. The second half was sort of a Jekyll and Hyde year last year. The first half was very good. Second half was awful. And both have persisted through this year. To answer your question on the domestic side, when does it turn around? Right now, it's kind of bumping a little bit along the bottom. I don't think from the conversation we had earlier that enough shippers would move their former yellow freight to truckload to make any sort of significant dent in that. I think it's going to be kind of just bumping along for the rest of the year. We'll see maybe 5 or 6 cent increase holiday time, because you always see sort of the truckload rates go up in December. And then I would say maybe, Q1's really a weird place where you probably won't get a rebound in Q1 because it's sort of the off season.
That's all the returns happening that time.
Yeah. So I'd say my gut tells me springtime next year is probably the first place where we could potentially see that for the truckload industry. And then if that happened, I would say domestic intermodal is probably about 3 months behind them. So maybe May of next year and then August of next year. But I would tell you again, just to plug our conference, that we're going to have Tim Ashoff, the COO of Crete Carrier, on a fireside chat with me. And I will, of course, ask him that question, get his opinion on exactly what you just asked me. And then from the intermodal perspective, we've got JB Hunt there, we've got STG there, Swift Intermodal there. So, I mean, there's so many places that's a very good question. I think that's what all shippers want to know. It's a topic I certainly will ask people who are even more experienced than me what their opinions are.
What are you thinking, Eric? And I plug again, JOC is coming September 25th through 27th. You can register at this link here. It'll be in the show notes. You can find it. But what do you think, Eric? Do you think it's that we're looking next year, maybe Q2, Q3?
So let me first answer the first part of the question that you asked to Ari first, is when did it start? So probably everyone on the JOC editorial team is tired of me bringing up this point or hammering it home, depending. I try to look at things through the perspective of demand is way down, but it had to come down because the pandemic demand was literally, as we all saw, unsustainable over a long period of time. And there's a guy named Bo King who's fairly active on Twitter, I think he's with XBO, and he wrote the perfect way to describe it. He said, when I'm writing market reports to internal teams and clients, I keep using the analogy that we fell from the sky, not into an abyss, which is, I think, a very good way of putting it, right? Like, yes, it's a drop, but it's a drop back down to like where we can actually be viable and sustainable, not a pit that we need to get ourselves out of, right? Yeah. So I try to keep that in mind, and that cuts really across all the modes that we cover. We've seen the same thing, right? Huge drop off this roller coaster, but we had to climb the roller coaster to get to the point where we could get to the drop.
Yeah, I would echo that by saying, if you look at the producer price index for truckload, for intermodal, for LTL, or I track for domestic intermodal internally, sort of my guess at what gross revenue is for domestic intermodal providers. The charts are all the same. They were going up after COVID, and now they're coming down, but they're not coming down necessarily to like 2017 or 2018 or even 2019 levels. They're still above that. So they're just not as high as they were. So I guess technically, yes, recession, but on a historic basis, there's still growth from 2019 versus 2023.
Well, this is an industry of feast and famine.
Every recession is not the same, right? Like, I think that's the important content. So when do we get out of it? I am not a paid economist, so take this with whatever grain of salt you want. But like Ari, we talk to tons of people whose lives are sort of very, this is a very important question for their livelihood. And, I would say most forwarders on the international side and most shippers that I speak to on the international side are eyeing that like post-Lunar New Year period, like Ari mentioned. Now, the question I have is, I don't know whether that's just a convenient sort of like date in the calendar to sort of pin your hopes on, or whether there's actually something fundamental that will change at that point. I suspect it's more of the former. It's more of like, well, we're going to get past the holiday season. Inventories are going to be so depleted that we're going to have no choice but to reorder across the board. And if the economy doesn't crater between now and Christmas, like at some point people will start to gain confidence again that we've got our footing. It's the soft landing, all that stuff. But I don't know. Like, there's so many times this past year where it was like, oh, well, we're going to see. I think it's going to be better after the Lunar New Year. Oh, I think it's going to be better when it's, spring season and Home Depot needs all their barbecues and lawnmowers. Oh, I think it's going to be back to school.
Yeah, that's right.
One thing I would watch, Eric, is the diesel prices have gone up a lot in the last 4 to 6 weeks. And that will raise costs for everyone. But I think there's also talk from an economic perspective. Does the Fed go back to raising interest rates the next time they meet, which I think is in September?
Cool off.
Do they raise it 1/4 point? And I mean, that has an effect on the supply chain because it affects inventory costs and so on and so forth. So to the extent that the Fed raises interest rates, that also begs the question of how long, how much inventory you carry, how much longer you could kind of keep that inventory in stock, how much ordering activity happens, how much buying happens even.
Well, okay, so we've talked about what the future is for maybe hoping to see us out of this freight recession in a couple of months, maybe. But let's talk about long-term future. Eric, I love the future, robots and all of these things. Do you think when will robot trucking actually make an impact in their industry? Because I know a lot of these companies have pulled away from the United States. Some of them are still trying to do it. The FMCSA has put out some supplemental advance notice of proposed rulemaking. Like they talk about it. What are your thoughts? Like, are robots coming for us, or are they going to be away for a few more years?
It's interesting. I would have answered like 3 hours ago. I would have answered this question a little bit differently than I do. I actually talked to someone just earlier today who's in this sort of automation business, the more like software process, like the type of stuff that's going to affect headcount in offices more than behind the wheel. And he actually said he had met a very interesting broker in the Midwest that is already has essentially autonomous trucks in their fleet
Yeah.
in a corridor in a state that I won't mention because it might make it too obvious who this is. But I don't necessarily I haven't even chatted with this company yet.
Yeah.
And he was like adamant, like this is not a guy who's prone to overstatement, but he was adamant that this was something real. Now that said, that's one small example. I think we're seeing way more evidence that the actual technical part of autonomous driving, which I think most of us had assumed was progressing pretty rapidly and was on course to actually be viable, if there was political and kind of cultural will around having driverless trucks on the road. I think that has been overstated in a lot of ways, and that is going to have a compounding effect on people's unwillingness to sort of like let an 18-wheeler roll down their highway with
80,000 pounds with no human being. Yeah.
So, I think the last year has been really destructive in terms of how fast that timeline can happen. But I mean, there's going to be a point at some point where it is replacing some certain percentage of our trucks on the highway.
Well, it's a question of when, right? It's not a question of if. I mean, if you look at the cost of trucking, it's fuel and labor. That's the big thing. And so obviously this is the natural progression of the technology. But I'm curious, like, do you think that it'll be in the rail space it'll come first, and in the distribution space? Like, where does the landing happen?
Well, so, just real quickly, I think the safety issue is such that it's clearly indisputable that driverless cars are safer than human cars at this point, right? Like even in their current
state,
right? Like
exactly.
We are not tremendous. Even the best drivers are not tremendous at avoiding distractions and all the things that we do that are not optimal at any given moment. We are great at like recovering from things that a robot would have trouble or a machine would have trouble doing. So, timeline, as long as no one remembers this, I would say within 10 years, we'll have seen some portion that's noticeable on the road that is driverless.
Yeah, we have a comment I'll put up here just because the self-driving robot cars are targeting the agricultural industry. So AI in off-highway applications, that's pretty common.
Yeah, you mentioned like where are we going to see it? I mean, I think like drones, I think is a good, somewhat of a corollary, right?
Mm-hmm.
So drones, I think we all sort of expected to see a lot more like drones and flying vehicles parading around the sky, dropping packages.
That's right.
We're parachuting out as passenger, whatever your vision of the future was. And then it ran into it's kind of a messy world. And so any situation where you can control the environment, so a warehouse, some stretch of between point A and point B where things need to move, a container terminal, some point where things need to move and you have a bit of control over what those things might encounter, obviously are natural places where I think we should expect to see autonomous vehicles be the norm and not the anomaly. But anything where, like I'm sitting in India, right outside my window is a road where you're going to encounter cyclists, motorcycles, scooters, tractors with all sorts of stuff on the back of them, water tankers, cows, people with monkeys on the back, like everything you could possibly see. And is LiDAR going to be able to like recognize the model that is getting fed into my LiDAR going to be able to recognize all that? You don't see a lot of Teslas here. Right.
Well, like one of the big fights with the longshoremen when they were in the conversation was around automation of the ports. Like Ari, I mean that has been creeping into the ports at some level. Is that right?
Yeah, and actually, where I was thinking, it's interesting you mentioned ports. I was thinking of two port examples in my head when Eric was answering the question. So, one came to my mind, which is that at some point, either later this month or early next month, the Georgia Ports Authority and NFI are going to open up a transloading facility right next to the Garden City terminal. I believe, I'm not sure on day one this will be the case, but at least if not pretty soon afterwards, there's going to be a private access road to move stuff over there so you don't have to actually go out on public streets. I would think that would be an example where if there's technology for driverless straddle carriers,
Well,
you
we've
move
seen
it that way, or Charleston, if they ever use the Leatherman terminal, they same thing. They're going to have on dock rail via a private access road. Could you, in theory, use driverless straddle carriers to move containers over to the CSXNS site over to those trains?
Yeah, that's why I look at companies like Outriders, one of these like autonomous spotting trucks or hostlers or yard dogs or shunters or whatever they want to call them. They're the terminal trucks. And then you have like Kodiak, who's making kits that can convert, over the road trucks into autonomous. It just seems like for such a long time, it's always been like, it's going to happen tomorrow. It's going to happen tomorrow. But it's always never, never, never tomorrow. But it feels like it's getting so much closer. I mean, warehouse automation, mass production of things, that's been pretty common for a decade. So it's just a matter of time for the robots coming. I just don't know, like the regulatory landscape, like how will we do that when driving a truck is the most common job for high school educated men in the entire country? Like that is the most common job. Some of these things that we think will be there as careers may not. I'm just always curious to see thoughts from people like you guys about how this is progressing.
Well, the minute an autonomous truck wipes out 5 cars on the highway, there will be congressional hearings about it. If a human driver does the exact same thing, it's in the newspaper the next day and then forgotten the day after.
And they start talking about tort reform. Like that's once you have a catastrophic injury, the next logical progression is these plaintiff attorneys are making too much money. These people, that's the conversation. That's what I've always anticipated that. Well, it's like I like the nuclear verdict's a good example. Like nuclear verdict is not a legal term. It's a term that's made up to say if it's over 10 million, it's like Hiroshima or Nagasaki. It's not. It's just liability. But people use all sorts of interesting phrases. Well, we're getting close on time here. I want to once again plug the Journal of Commerce's Inland Distribution Conference. What can people expect to learn, Ari? What people will they learn at the Inland Distribution Conference?
So I could certainly speak to my session. So from the truckload side, I will very much talk to Creek Carrier about the truckload industry when their COO Tim Ashoff thinks the market will turn. I'm going to certainly talk to him about contracting and how do they look at contracts if they sign a 12-month deal and that contract doesn't look so good in month 9, 10, 11, 12. Do you rip that up and tell the shipper you need to renegotiate, or you just ride it out? Because there is a chance, since we're talking about when this turnaround happens, that if a shipper signs a contract in January or February, that rate may not hold for the full year. So we'll certainly have those questions. We'll talk to him about what shippers can do to help out the truckload carriers to be better at their jobs. And then on the intermodal side, we'll have pretty much all the big guys. JB Hunt will be there, Schneider will be there, Hub Group will be there, Swift will be there, STG Logistics will be there. So the 2 areas we're really going to focus in on, again, are things that shippers on the 26th and 27th of September in Chicago, the things that shippers care about. So with JB Hunt and CH Robinson, and CSX, we're going to talk about customer service reps, because I've spoken to so many shippers who will tell me it is not just about how the operations go, but it's about the account manager, or the account rep, or the customer service rep, or whatever term you want to use. And if you have a bad account manager, the entire company gets a poor reputation, and you can lose that customer as a shipper to a competitor. So we're going to spend a lot of time on how these companies are investing in the best customer service experience for that liaison between the shipper and the intermodal provider. And then the other thing we'll, of course, talk about is pricing going into next year. Same thing on the intermodal side. Will we see rates go up? Will we go down? My guess is on the domestic intermodal side, we'll probably see rates that are flat year over year. But we'll ask some experts where they see the contract pricing going. And then the only other thing I would say that people will definitely learn about is the options in Mexico, because we've written a lot about this year, the CPKC option, the Falcon Premium, which is the competitor product with UP and CN and Ferromex. And so we're going to have Schneider, we're going to have CPKC. Again, I said Hub Group, CN will be there, JB Hunt will be there. Well, we'll talk to all of them about Mexico, and we hope shippers walk away with a better understanding of all their options if they want an nearshore on how they can route cargo from Mexico to wherever in the United States, whether it be Chicago or the Northeast or the West Coast. So it's a lot of useful information at this conference that, again, is really geared towards things that will help the shipper, or things on the minds of shippers and receivers out there going into next year.
Eric, for you, what do you want people to learn from the Inland Distribution Conference? What are you most excited about for this coming up?
So my sessions, no surprise, are geared around sort of the technology side of things. So I sort of, in a way, got back to basics this year. We are having a really interesting fireside chat with Chad Olson from AVRL. I don't know if you've interacted with him at all, but
I've never met him, but I see him online quite a bit.
Fascinating guy, fascinating company who I think is going to open a lot of eyes around what automation really is. And then after that, it's kind of the basics from a technology perspective, getting back to basics, pricing, tools to help pricing, and TMS. And there's one other. No, sorry.
The Gnosis freight session is very interesting, because in the rail industry, the tracking and tracing, whether it's international or domestic,
right.
Well, I should say it's international. Domestic, JB Hunt, all of them, they have GPS trackers. So in the international world, with the ocean containers, the tracking on the rail
goes into black hole.
It's garbage. It's complete garbage. It's non-existent. So we're going to have a session with Gnosis and Five Below, the retail store, talking about some of the technology that's being introduced into that space to really close the gap and let shippers know where their ocean containers are once they hit the rail, rather than having it be a huge big black hole, which historically has been the case.
Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic. Well, I look forward to. Oh, go ahead, Eric.
I will say, Bill Cassidy, who's obviously not here with us, but is Ari's partner in crime on this event. Bill and Ari recruit their asses off when it comes to this event. They spend literally all year getting the best people in the industry to talk, and it's like, I have no bones saying this, it's the most substantive program in the entire industry. So
I couldn't agree with that more. Couldn't agree more. The thing that I find so interesting about the Inland Distribution Conference is the quality of, like, not just manufacturers that are there, the big rails that are there, the big motor carriers that are there, brokerages. It's a supply web, and there's so much value to understand. Like, we are so, as industry people, we're so myopic. Like, we focus on our thing. Everything else is kind of just noise, but everything actually impacts everything that we do. And what I find with the JOC's Inland Distribution is you get a good perspective of what's happening out there. And it's not like a trade show where it's a bunch of booths and people talking, but it's substantive discussions, and be able to ask questions of these people. So if anyone has not been attending this thing, it's something you ought to do. Gentlemen, thank you for coming today. I really appreciate it. If you can stick around for a minute, I'd like to talk to you after the show. But before you go, Ari, where can people find more of what you're putting out every day?
Okay, so obviously our website, which is joc.com. You can also find a lot of my stuff on LinkedIn. You can find my stuff on Twitter. I don't have TikTok anymore, but
you have one now?
I did for a time, but you just type in my name, which I guess you can see there, ARIASHE, and I'm pretty much the first search result on any social, because it's a unique enough name. So just, you follow me or you like me, and I pretty much put all my content there.
That's awesome. How about you,
Eric? Substack. Your Substack too.
Oh yeah, sorry. I have a Substack also as well that I not as frequently as I want to, but yes, I put out a Substack note, including one probably before the end of this month, that kind of goes into all of the stuff that I know that comes my way that just doesn't fit into the Journal of Commerce website. All that kind of extra stuff that just doesn't have a place on our website goes
the director's notes. The director's notes.
Yeah. I'll need to get a copy of that so I can toss it in the show notes. Eric, where can people find you? Where are you at these days?
It's similar, joc.com. I'm very active on Twitter, LogTechEric. I am actually, I find LinkedIn to be probably the most useful thing in our industry, because it's actually people trying to interact with each other on a really substantive way. So I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. I have a Substack, but it's basically on hiatus since the spring. I've just sort of run out of time, and that's been the thing that I've had to sacrifice at the altar. But I hope to restart it again because I know that a lot of people liked it. So I'll try to get that going again. But those are the best ways.
Well,
and Eric.Johnson@spglobal.com.
We'll make sure to put all in the show notes. I'm going to kick you guys both out and then stick around if you can. I got to say my little outro and we'll go to the next thing. So gone. They're gone. We did it. Episode whatever is completed. You now know a little bit more about what's happening in the supply chain with some incredibly talented and very knowledgeable guests. I am so grateful that they had the time to hop on, especially Eric in a world away, a whole half a world away. The Journal of Commerce's Inland Distribution Conference, September 25th through the 27th. You can register at the link here. I will put that in the show notes. I am telling you, this is advice, not legal advice. I'm not your lawyer, but I am giving you advice. You should attend this if you can. It is incredibly insightful. And this is a message for people who are in Chattanooga. If you're not in Chattanooga or you're not going to Chattanooga, this message I'm about to say is not for you. But for those of you who are in Chattanooga or will be in Chattanooga, on August 15th, 2023, 11:30 Eastern, 10:30 Central, I will be speaking at the Tennessee Trucking Association at Chattanooga State Community College, speaking about maintenance and how people need to do more of it. 1 in 5 failing is not a good metric. That's not a key to success. If you want to deliver freight on time, undamaged, safely, you have to maintain your equipment. And finally, this is brought to you by Contract Leasing Corporation. Contract Leasing Corporation. We want to lease you trailers. Do you have trailers? Do you need trailers? Do you want to sell them and lease them back? Contact us at contractleasing.net. That's contractleasing.net. I'll put that in the thing. Contractleasing.net. Thank you, as always, for tuning in. One more episode done. We will see you next time. And then I hit the button.